Welcome to English 3. This is class 22, week 7. We are on unit 3 and we are doing the culminating activity, part 1, and I am Jillian Percy. Ways to reach me. You can reach me in the studio right now if you want to talk to me, 1-800-465-7144. If you want to reach me during office hours, 1-800-667-3703. You can also fax your work over to 1-800-463-7852. If you have a question about your work, you can email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. If you want to rewatch a video, you can go over to gpercy wasa. So we are in the final few pages of unit 3. So the plan is today we'll cover part 1. Tomorrow and maybe the next day, we'll take a look at part 2, and then we will have wrapped that unit up. Culminating activity. So this is the final activity to show what you've learned in unit 3. It's called a journey across cultures. For both parts, it is going to be 45 marks, but just for this part, it is 21 marks. You are to choose any 3 of the following topics. Use the internet and your knowledge of it to find some information about your chosen topics. The search engine Google will be a good place to start. You can obviously use all sorts of search engines, whatever you happen to prefer. Here are your 7 possible topics. Remember, you don't have to use all of them. You only pick 3. First topic, a visit to another country, your choice of countries. Number 2, a high school education in British Columbia. Number 3, adoption services in Canada. Number 4, the importance of volunteering. Number 5, immigration to Canada. Number 6, violence in the media. Number 7, Inuit culture. Presentation. So for this, you're going to download and print at least 2 pages for each topic, including any pictures and other graphics you find, and add a title page for each topic. I'm just going to say, having kind of worked through this a little bit, I strongly think you're probably going to want to have more like 3 pages than just 2. I found it really hard to do part 2 without having more information. 21 marks is for the whole thing. You get 7 marks for each of your 3 topics. So I am going to be looking at what you downloaded to see if it's relevant to the topic, if it's going to be useful. So we're going to talk a little bit about that more, but just be aware you can't just download the first 2 pages you find that have the word British Columbia in them and count that good. You're going to have to make sure you spend a little bit of time finding helpful research on the internet, not just anything on the internet, okay? All right, so first of all, look at the topics. Which 3 topics interest you the most? Or you can always start the opposite way and go, which ones don't interest you at all and you have 0 desire to research them? After you know which ones you want to do, which topics can you find interesting and find reliable information on? I haven't tried to research all of these. Some of them it may be harder than others to find good research on. And think about what topics you want to write about in part 2. Whatever of these 3 topics you choose, we're eventually going to choose 2 of them to write paragraphs about. So make sure it's something that you're going to want to spend a deep dive on, because otherwise it's going to be kind of tedious to spend the next 3 days working on this. Make sure you've got useful information. Remember that both pages don't have to be from the same site. In fact, it might be better not to. And on one research page, you can have information from multiple sites. That's totally fine. Some web pages have a lot of like boring stuff at the top that you don't need. It's totally fine to cut and paste that stuff out. Try to include the URL for the section you copied though, so I can tell where you got it from. Now, anytime you're using the internet, you have to spend a little bit of time evaluating the internet source. How can you tell if an internet source is reliable? So let's say I picked visiting another country as my topic, and I'm going to pick visiting France. How can I find reliable or true information? What if I just enter France in my search engine? What comes up? Okay. Well, when I did that, this came up. Certainly not all of this is useful. Here's a little map. It's nice to know. There's their flag. Here's kind of a photograph of part of France, probably Paris, I believe, because of the Eiffel Tower. Tiny little uh, kind of summary, then a bunch of news stories, right? Wikipedia is almost always going to be the first thing that comes up. That's why I was saying don't use Wikipedia, though it's not considered reliable. Okay. The reason is because lots of people have the ability to edit it. So somebody could put the most wackadoodle crazy thing in there. Someone else will find it later and it'll get corrected. But in the meantime, you could look at it, not know anything about France, and think that it's correct. So the one thing with Wikipedia, though, is usually at the bottom of Wikipedia articles, it will have external links, and those links are often reliable sources. So that's one thing to think about. You can see this is some news stories. France uses tear gas and water cannon on a banned pro-Palestinian rally in Paris. That's probably not going to help me write about a visit to Paris. Although, maybe it could be in terms of like, oh, maybe I don't want to visit Paris right now if they're having a bunch of, protests and things like that. But technically, really, like these news stories aren't really on point to helping me write this particular research. All right. So here's an example. I pulled up France uses tear gas on banned pro-Palestinian rally as Macron, who is their president, calls for calm. French police used tear gas and water cannon to break up a banned rally in support of the Palestinian people in Paris on Thursday, as President Emmanuel Macron urged the French to remain united and refrain from bringing the Israeli-Hamas conflict home. Macron's interior minister had earlier banned pro-Palestinian protests, saying they were likely to generate disturbances to public order. France is home to Europe's largest Muslim and Jewish communities. The Middle East conflict has often stoked domestic tensions in the past. So this is just the beginning. There's more if you kept on reading. You would have to decide if this is useful to you. Now, the part about there being the largest Muslim and Jewish communities might be kind of interesting. Maybe you'd want to follow up on that. And in real life, you might not want to go to a country that's having a lot of protests. But overall, I don't know if this would be really helpful for writing my summary about France. These are some more, because of course, if you go down, here's some more things. Again, the top stuff is all like the news. Then they have, I'm not even sure what these are exactly. More news stories really about France. Here's some common questions that get answered. Here's some pictures of some historical landmarks with prices. So I'm going to assume that they're trying to sell you like the tickets and stuff. Here's just some general stuff. France, this might be interesting. History map, flag. A lot of this might not be useful, is what I'm saying, right? The thing is, like, say I grabbed Eiffel Tower. You don't want to print 2 whole pages just in the Eiffel Tower, because obviously, if you were visiting France, that wouldn't really be the only thing you'd go and do. And then here now at the bottom, now we're finally beginning to see websites that might be more helpful for your research project if you were going to visit the country. So this is France news, tourist information, destinations. Down here, we've got National Geographic for kids. Now, this is a reliable resource, but because it's for kids, it might not have enough interesting information for it to be useful to print out. Although you could go check out National Geographic, the adult version, and see if it's got any interesting articles on France, because it might. Now, what if I get more specific in my search terms? So this time I entered planning a vacation in France, and definitely a whole bunch of different sites came up. So we've got France bucket list, all you need for planning a trip to France, the typical question things, France trip builder, build your own trip to France. Rick Steves, who writes some guidebooks, has a little thing. Quora is a little question and answer site. Anybody who's a member can post an answer. The answers, as far as I understand, are not reviewed or checked. So that is probably not a resource that's considered reliable. Let me give you an example of what it looks like. So here, somebody's got a question, someone's going to answer it. Might be great, might be not useful. Then you've got an ad, then you've got another answer. And I find the site tends to be this way. It's really, really ad heavy. So I don't find it that useful for a research project. So now we're going to check out one of the sites aimed towards the tourists. As you're checking this site out, think about, is it accurate and reliable? In other words, is the information it's giving us true? Is it useful? Does the information relate to what I need for my assignment? So for example, the news story we saw a few slides back, it was probably true, but it wasn't really useful. Is it trying to sell me something? Maybe focused only on what they can sell to you. So this is something that is important. For example, sometimes when you do searches like Expedia will come up, and really they're wanting to sell you flights or hotels or cars or whatever, and they're gearing you towards stuff that they get a kickback on. So that's something to be mindful of when you're doing this kind of research. Does the site have any bias that you need to be cautious about? Remember, bias is like any type of a prejudice. So for example, one disgruntled tourist might post a lot of negative comments about France that may or may not be true, but it reflects their bias about France. Sources like that are not usually considered a reliable or a useful source. So here is, let's see, a site. Let me see if I can pull it up. Okay, so France bucket list. And it says, we are independent travelers and restless souls with a passion for Paris, our city, and France. So now we know a little bit about them. Basically, they live in France. So they're definitely going to be useful, I think. Whether they're accurate, probably, but we don't know for sure. Now, it does state right here, this article may contain compensated links. So in other words, they get paid for some of these links. So that's something to be mindful of as you were looking at this site. So it says how to get started on planning a trip to France. There's a little video you could watch about France, when to visit France. See, it's very picture and ad heavy. Do you need an ID card or a passport? That's helpful. This has been about a special program. Now, here it talks about where to visit France. It gives you some examples. And if you clicked on some of those little blue links, you would get some more information. But then you can see right away, they've got booking your trip, different flights, train tickets, all those kind of things. Makes me think they probably get kickbacks on those things, to be honest with you. Anyways, so somewhat useful, more for the links than for itself. Reliable, probably hard for us to tell. Was it useful? Maybe for the links. Are they trying to sell me something? Yeah, definitely they were. Was it biased? I don't know, it didn't seem biased, particularly other than pro France, but that's okay. I expect that. Yeah. Okay. Not directly selling me anything, but I would say definitely monetization. So that means that they're going to want to include links that they make money off of. So there might be some things in France that are totally free and that you might really enjoy, but they might not mention them because they don't make money off of those particular links. Okay. So again, because one of the first topics is travel, it's a nice big wide open topic. I thought people might pick it. That's why I'm kind of doing a deep dive onto how to do that research, because I think it's kind of useful. This is a list of some common travel guides that people often use to plan their trips. These will have these exist in print copy, but also in ebook copy, okay? These are really common guides. Rick Steves has a bunch of guidebook series, Lonely Planet, Frommer's Guides, Fodor's Travel, DK Eyewitness Travel, Rough Guides, Michelin Green Guides, Brat Travel Guides, and the Blue Guides. So these are useful for planning any trip. And you can see he kind of meant like this, I got this site off of this guy's site. So obviously he lists himself first and says why he thinks his are great. But he's also kind of careful to say what his stuff doesn't cover, right? He mentions what they're known for and what they're useful for. It's definitely worth checking these out if you choose an assignment to pull up some things that might help for you. Okay. So I ended up using Lonely Planet just to give a chance of it. Here's kind of what came up. You might also decide to focus on like one city in your country, because obviously, like if somebody were trying to visit Canada, there's no way they could visit all of Canada, even in like a 2-week vacation. They would have to just hit the highlights, which is really true for a lot of countries, right? I'm going to pull this up. Let me see here, kind of show you. So here's Lonely Planet. There's a little search tool. I just put France. France is what came up. These are the very famous lavender fields. Apparently they're known for their lavender. Oops. Okay. So it talks about best time to visit, best places to visit, must-see attractions, Cité de l'Espace, Eiffel Tower, Centre Pompidou. Now, I would have to kind of start clicking around to get other things to see. The nice thing is it does include not only sites to see, but you've got restaurants, famous restaurants, entertainment, nightlife, which are basically bars, great places to shop in France, absolutely, hotels. So this is one possible way to get some information on a country of your choice. Okay, so I kind of looked around. Here is a possible example of a couple of pages from my research of a trip to France. And you can see here, right? This was a list of like, I don't know, 12 places to see in France. I didn't like all of them, so I just picked the ones I wanted and cut and pasted them here, right? So Paris, the urban part of Paris, Normandy coast, the wine routes in Strasbourg and Alsace, Boho Cheek in Biarritz and Basque Country, Nice and the Mediterranean, and Mont Saint Michel for medieval history buffs. And then over here, this is all from Lonely Planet. This is from Rick Steves and just talks about some of the different parts of Paris, not just Paris, but France. Now, later on, after I finished this research, I went ahead and started working on part 2. And when I went to do it, I realized I didn't have a whole lot of information about any of these sites. I probably should have just picked 3 or 4 and gotten some more like detailed information on specific places to visit. It was really, really hard to write my rough draft because my research pages were a little bit shallow. By this, I mean they kind of skimmed the surface. They had a few sentences about each thing, but they didn't really go deep on any topic, which meant I didn't really have enough details to help me write my paragraph. So I did an extra page of how I would do it differently now, having seen the problems I run into. On the next page, I have included a few deep dives to give you an example of information that might have been slightly more useful. Okay, so for this one, I did a deep dive on the Louvre and one on the Notre Dame Cathedral, and then a little tiny one on the Eiffel Tower. And that way I know that those are 3 items that I can talk about in a little more depth in my upcoming paragraph. So that's why I was saying too, with just 2 pages, it might be hard to find enough. So this is what I did. Okay, so that was just the one topic, and that was just kind of talking about how to do research. What we talked about will apply to any of these upcoming topics, okay? But I kind of did a deep dive into one topic just to show you what we're looking for. So, but that information applies to all of these things. So one of your other topics is a high school education in British Columbia. So when you're first thinking, where can I look for information about it? Think about the topic and what you might write about it. And that can give you different ideas of words and phrases to enter into the search engine. So maybe I want to check out British Columbia Ministry of Education. How does their curriculum differ from ours? Private school websites or private school review sites like Our Kids. Maybe I want to choose a city like Vancouver, find their public school board and see what kind of special programs they offer. A lot of schools do, especially in bigger cities. Maybe I want to see how First Nations education is handled in British Columbia. Or maybe I want to check out what kind of alternative education schools they have, distance education like WASA or any kind of special education schools. So there's all sorts of directions I could go into to grab some information. So here's an example. When I just wrote high school education in British Columbia, here's kind of what came up. The school system in British Columbia, list of British Columbia high schools by city, welcome to British Columbia, BC for high school, images of high school and secondary school in British Columbia. So I grabbed this first link and clicked into that to see what it was about. It appears to be aimed towards people who are new immigrants to Canada. And so it's telling them, hey, if you just arrived in Canada, you're settling here, here's what you need to know about schools in British Columbia. So this is not the whole page. Obviously, I couldn't fit the whole page on. This is just kind of the beginning. And it talks about public schools, the public English schools, public French schools, Catholic schools. And it goes on to talk about homeschooling, all the different things. So that was a very useful site, right? I would definitely check that out if I were doing that article. Now, putting a different search term in yields completely different results. So for this search, I put in First Nation high schools in British Columbia, and you can see things are much different from what I've got. I've got First Nation schools from the province of British Columbia. I have a First Nation School Association. I have something called Make a Future, talks about First Nation schools. I'm not sure what that is. First Nation Schools Association, is this the same thing? Looks like it is because it's got the same icon. CBC, there's a news article about several First Nations in BC set to take control over. So this would be very useful to get some more information on. Okay, going ahead to look at different topics. Adoption services in Canada. This is a huge topic. It's really going to vary from province to province because every province handles this kind of thing differently. You may find you want to do a bunch of research on one province, which is fine because I don't know how you, we're only writing one paragraph later, so you're not going to have a lot of room to write about. So first of all, is there a difference between private adoption and public adoption? What are the procedures to apply to adopt? Is there any training or qualifications you need? Are there any differences regarding First Nations adoption? Do the provinces run foster to adopt programs? Like some places offer like you foster for 2 years and then the child is adopted. Other places, the foster care system and the adoption system are run totally separately. So you may have some more questions about adoption services, right? This is one you could do all sorts of really deep dives into. Okay. Another topic. Oh my gosh, the importance of volunteering. This is such a huge topic. You might try looking for phrases such as volunteer opportunities, local volunteer opportunities, the effects of volunteering on communities, effects of volunteering on individuals. You might want to check out some major volunteer organizations like Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, Salvation Army. Canada has kind of a version of the Peace Corps called Service Corps, YMCA, Meals on Wheels, Volunteer World. Those are all major volunteer organizations. Checking those out might give you some ideas or some links. I'm just going to grab a topic up here and try. Like if I say effects of volunteering on communities, it's kind of an obscure topic, but let's see. Effects of volunteering on communities. So here we've got some stuff about community engagement and the benefits of community service, volunteering, its surprising benefits, the impact of volunteering, 3 health benefits of volunteering. How does volunteering help my community? So that gave me something different than what about effective volunteering on individuals? So brings that up again, 3 health benefits of volunteering. Oh, a lot of this stuff is kind of similar to what we saw. Oh, but we've got volunteering may be good for the body and mind, exploring the effects of volunteering on the social, mental, and something else that kind of trail off there. The effects of volunteering on the volunteer, negative effects of volunteering. So you absolutely can find different things with different search terms. That's the important thing is don't just put one search term in, try different search terms to see what different things come up, okay? All right, let's see, what do we have next? Okay, other topics, immigration to Canada. Think about different aspects of immigration to help you think of different search terms. So which countries tend to immigrate to Canada? Like there's all sorts of countries. Are we a specific destination for some countries over other countries? Why are they immigrating? Why are they trying to come to Canada? What type of immigration? As a refugee, as a spouse, as a child, just ordinary immigration? What's the process? How do you go ahead and start the process to try and immigrate to Canada? What are the requirements? Do you need certain kinds of education or work experience? Do you need a certain amount of money? What about health issues? What if you have a criminal record? What did immigration to Canada used to be like? How has it changed? Do we have illegal immigration, right? That's a big topic in the States. Is that a problem for us or no? Recent news stories on immigration, such as Ukrainian refugees. You could look into organizations that specifically help immigrants or government websites targeted in immigrants. Now, again, this is a huge topic. You could write a book on this topic. So you're going to have to, as you're searching, kind of decide how to narrow it down. So I'm going to try one search and see what comes up. For example, if I say, what is the process for immigrating to Canada? Okay. Permanent residence is a little bit different. What are the requirements to, oh, that's express entry. It says immigration, but it's not actually immigration. Ooh, how much money must you have to immigrate to Canada? Wow. All right, let's go on to this. This is kind of interesting. Proof of funds. This is how much money you need to settle in Canada. We update these numbers every year based on 50% of the low income cutoff totals. To stay eligible, you may need to update your settlement fund numbers in your express entry profile. This must be done no later than April 25th, 2023. Who needs proof of funds? If you're entering the Federal Skilled Worker Program or the Federal Skilled Trades Program, I don't know what they are, but obviously there's special programs for doing immigration. Who doesn't need proof of funds? Apparently, you don't need proof of funds if you're applying under the Canadian Experience class, or if you're authorized to work in Canada and you have a valid job offer. How much money do you need? It's based on the size of your family. You must include your partner and your dependent children, even if they're not coming to Canada with you. Wow. So if you're just one family member, I guess just yourself, 13,757. If you've got 7 family members, you need 36,407. Wow. So all this goes into the amount of money that you've got and how you go about this. So I think, is this, yeah. Immigrate to Canada. Okay, so this is the government website on immigrating to Canada. And wow, there's a lot of different things. We've got family sponsorship, Quebec selected skilled workers, temporary resident, special pathway just for Hong Kong residents, a pathway if you're a refugee, if you're a caregiver for somebody. So there's all sorts of information here on immigration. You could also, if you want to look up history of immigration to Canada. Okay, so that's Wikipedia. I'm not going to use Wikipedia, but I will use the Canadian Encyclopedia. That's a really reliable resource. Oops. Okay, so this talks about the history of immigration way back to 16th and 18th century, New France, Loyalist immigration, Irish immigration, Western immigration, migrates and urban centers, immigration and racism. All right. So this would be an interesting resource if you want to approach the historical aspect of migration. All right, let's take a look at some of the other topics. Violence in the media. We just did, this is the course, right, that we did an assignment on looking at violence in the media. This is kind of another take on it. You could look at violence towards different groups of people, violence towards women or children, racial violence, violence toward disabled people or elderly people. What are the effects of violence in media? How has violence in media changed? Are there any kind of legal restrictions on violence in TV, movies, or games? How does it affect the consumer themselves? Does it change how the consumer relates to other people? Does it being fictional violence versus non-fictional violence make a difference? Like if I'm watching a true crime movie, is that okay? Or does it have the same effect as like watching a fictional movie like say Pulp Fiction that has a lot of violence in it? Does violence in media, does it contribute to real life crimes? So let's say I wanted to look that up here. I'm going to close some points here. Okay. Does violence in media cause real life crimes? Okay, so here we have a study on the impact of electronic media violence. Here we have commentary from the American Psychological Association. I don't know who Rutledge is. Here's one from the American Academy of Family Physicians. Movie Web. So that's a movie site. New York Times, very famous newspaper. Office of Justice Programs. Okay. So there's definitely all sorts of stuff I could look at. I could look up, say something like, is there more violence against women or men in media? Oh, that's talking about digital stuff. I was against, hang on a second. Oh, here's the influence of media violence on intimate partner. Oh, here's kind of interesting. Let's see. Research suggests that the representation of violence against women in the media has resulted in an increased acceptance of attitudes favoring domestic violence. While prior work had investigated the relationship between violent media and violent crime, there had been little effort to empirically examine the relationship between specific types of violent media exposure and the perpetration of intimate partner violence. So this is one where they are looking at how watching media violence against women may have impacted real life media violence against women. So that might be something you want to take a look at. This is a This is right at the edge. This is a bit kind of more university level than high school level, I would say. So you might want to try and find something that's similar to this, but maybe written at a slightly more accessible level. But this is definitely there, and it's definitely something that you might be able to read. Yep. It's got a lot of good stuff in it. It's when it starts to talk about some of the statistical stuff that can get really wordy. Is there any legal restrictions on violence? Legal restrictions on violence on TV in Canada? Because obviously that kind of thing could differ from country to country. Okay, so in fact, we do. This is the policy. Prevent the showing of gratuitous or glamorized scenes of violence. There is a 9 p.m. cutoff time. I didn't know this was still existence. I know it existed when I was a kid. Programs that are aired before 9 p.m. can't show violent scenes that are intended for adult audiences. So in other words, they're expecting kids to be in bed later on, so then it's okay, but earlier on, they don't want children to catch sight of things. There's parental responsibilities, and it talks about ways that you can block certain kinds of media. Hang on. Not a lot of details there, but there's some. Oh, and 1993. Ooh, that's like 30 years ago. There was some new restrictions on TV violence. Wow, that's kind of sad to me. And then a bunch of articles on it. TV and kids violence. Oh, here we go. This was originally published in 1996. Now, this would be interesting. I would want to take a look at some more recent information too. So this is a whole article about children and whether or not violence in media has affected children. Now, this is a long article. So when we're talking about saving research, you wouldn't be able to save all of this. Obviously, there's just not enough room. You'd have to kind of go through and target, hey, what are some really important paragraphs that give me information I could use for my research article. Okay. Final possible topic is on Inuit culture. Inuit culture is for the Northwest Territories, Yukon, Nunavut, so the far north, basically. And again, that's such a huge topic. There's so much that you could research and talk about here. You could look at government, family, traditional way of life, current way of life, the different language groups. How are the schools and education run up in the north? Is it different than how we run them down here? The legal system, Inuit religious system, food and clothing. Could do art and culture. There's so many things that you could look up. So again, let me go show you an example. Inuit art and culture. Okay, so we've got discover Inuit art, all sorts of images of Inuit art, Canadian Encyclopedia, Inuit sculpture art gallery. Okay, what if I wanted to do Inuit traditional way of life? Traditional way of life. Okay, so Wikipedia, again, I'm not going to use Wikipedia because I know it's not super reliable. Ocean-wide expeditions might be reliable. Windows to the universe, maybe. Britannica, that's a reliable encyclopedia. This is French up here. I don't know if it'll stay that. Canadian North Outfitting. That is almost certainly a company that sells things. I wouldn't go there. BC Campus Open Publishing, maybe. Learn Alberta. That sounds like it might be a school site. That might be useful. What else? See, I was wondering if I might get something that was specifically written by Inuit people, which would obviously be the most reliable resource. What about Inuit government? I wonder if that would come up. Government. It's weird that the University of Washington to me is writing about stuff. Lakehead University has stuff to say. Okay, the government of Nunavut. That's the kind of thing I was looking for. Okay, so this is written, presumably, by the government of Nunavut, which is primarily Inuit based, as far as I understand. So then it's talking about societal values. You could look up the different departments. For example, if I wanted to find out about education in Nunavut, it might talk about that there. Education, our vision, our mandate, latest news going on. Okay. So this definitely is coming more from a governmental perspective. So it's a bit high, but it's definitely going to be culture and heritage. Let's see what comes up. Oh, okay. So look, I've got elders and youth, heritage programs, archaeology and paleontology. Ooh, neat. Grants and contributions, probably not that interesting, but let's see if I looked up archaeology and paleontology. Ooh, so this has some interesting stuff. Oh, but just a brief little link. Okay, so it's maybe a starting point. It wouldn't be everything. It's a starting point. Okay. So you have to pick 3 topics to do the research on. You have to hand in at least 2 pages of research. Again, it's just cut and paste. That's fine. I wouldn't just take everything from one site. It's just not going to be enough for you to write an entire article if you're just grabbing from one site. I'm sure that you can think of other terms or other sites to look at, and that's great. The key thing to remember is you don't want to just go through the motions, okay? Don't just grab the first thing that comes up. Obviously, I can look things up too and see what comes up first. You want to make sure it's usable. We're going to be using this information in part 2. So if we don't do a good job on part 1, it's going to be pretty hard to do part 2. So please take your time. I'm just going to peek ahead to kind of show you what tomorrow's assignment is. You're going to be using 2 of your 3 topics and preparing a summary of the content you found for each one. In other words, you'll be commenting on what you discovered and read in your own words. They're going to be paragraph format, at least 7. Remember, they can always go over. You have to submit a rough copy and a final copy. Rough copies must be handwritten. Final copies must be computer printouts. 12 marks for each paragraph for a total of 24 marks. So keep in mind as you're doing your research, this is what you're aiming towards. You're going to have to write a paragraph on what you find. So you want what you found to be useful so you can write an interesting paragraph. Okay, so we are going to try and get a little bit of grammar done in the next 7 minutes. I've been trying to talk a little bit more about sentences because I find most people have a pretty good idea of what they want to say. Their sentences make sense. They're usually fine as far as that goes. It's often kind of the little tiny nitpicky stuff that's throwing people off. So part of me feels kind of silly even discussing some of this stuff because it seems so minute, but it's the kind of thing that can throw off how things sound, where just sometimes having the examples to follow can give you a better idea of how to do, especially our revisions and our editing sometimes, okay? So conditional sentences. Conditional sentences are used to express the idea that if one event happens, then another event will or might happen as a result. Now, these are going to be complex sentences. One part could be a complete sentence. That's called the main clause, or sometimes called the then clause for us. And one part is not a complete sentence, which we're often going to be calling the if clause. Conditional sentences will often use words like if, than, unless, than, when, and then. So there's 2 parts to these sentences, okay? There are 4 different types of conditional sentences in English, and each one expresses a different degree or type of probability that a situation will occur or could have occurred. So there's zero conditional sentences, first conditional sentences, second conditional sentences, and third conditional sentences. Okay, so zero conditional sentences are expressing general truths where one event always causes a certain result. So zero conditions, it's always going to happen. Both clauses will be written in the simple present tense, and they can use the combination of if then or sometimes when then. Sometimes the word then is implied. They don't actually use it. They just put kind of a comma there. So for example, if the assignments aren't done, then you fail the course. If you buy some groceries, we can eat. When the sun rises, a new day is here. So there's no question about these. They're conditional in the sense that one thing has to happen and then the other, but it's a certain condition. Once the first thing happens, the second thing happens for sure. Now, this is first conditional. These are situations where a certain result is probable or likely, but it's not 100% certain. So in this one, the if clause uses a present tense verb, and the main clause, which will often start with the word then, but not always, is going to use simple future, which we use the word will to show that. So if you sleep, you will feel better. If you take care of the truck better, it will last longer. If children play more sports, they will be healthier. If the city adds, I forgot that, sorry, adds a stop sign to the corner, there will be fewer accidents. Now, these can also be written in opposite order. The main clause can be written first, and this part can come last. So here's an example. I could write, you will be healthier if you eat more nutritious food. You will pass the course if you work hard in your assignments. These are both grammatical. I don't know that the meaning's really less clear. I think both of them are legitimate ways to write it. It's up to you what makes sense in your overall paragraph. Okay, these are called second conditional sentences. This is what you use if you're expressing outcomes that are unrealistic or unlikely to happen. They're often kind of like imaginary situations. Like, if I won the lottery, I would quit my job forever. So the if clause uses the simple past tense, and the main clause uses a simple present tense, but with helping verbs. These helping verbs indicate probability, things like could, should, would, okay? It shows that they're probable or possible outcomes, not definite. If I won the lottery, I would quit my job. If I became prime minister, I could run this country properly. If I had $1 billion, I might end poverty as we know it. So these second conditional are for things that are unrealistic. They're not too likely. Third conditional. These are ones that explain that something in the present would be different if we'd done things differently in the past. Okay? So for this one, the if clause uses the past perfect, had plus the past participle. So had eaten, had told, had given. The main clause uses those helping verbs that show probability, like would, could, should, or might, plus the word have, plus that past participle again. So would have gone, could have eaten, should have done, might have finished. If you had told me you needed a ride, I would have picked you up. So if you'd done this in the past, now would be different. If you had given me the money, I could have paid the bills. So third condition is talking about the past and how doing it differently would have changed what's going on right now. Okay, punctuating conditional sentences. You use a comma after the if clause and when it comes before the main clause. So comma, comma, comma. But if you switch it around and the if clause comes second, you don't need any kind of comma at all. Okay? I don't know if we'll have time. Here's a little summary. Zero conditional will happen. First conditional probably happens. Second conditional, unlikely or impossible to happen. Third conditional, it could have happened differently. Okay. And here it just kind of shows you what kind of grammar we use. Zero conditionals, both present tense. First conditional starts off with, or the if clause uses simple present, then clause uses simple future. Second conditional, the if clause uses simple past tense, and the then clause uses a probability helping verb plus the simple past tense. Third conditional uses had plus simple past tense, and the then clause uses a probability helping verb plus have plus simple past tense. That's kind of the one that's the hardest to write, I think. And here is some examples. I'm going to kind of flip that over into tomorrow's, and we will take a look at that tomorrow. Okay. We're running out of time here. Remember, tomorrow we'll talk about part 2 and how to do it. Try and work on your research. 3 topics, 2 pages at least, but you can easily do more. And remember, you want it to be usable to write your summary paragraphs. Okay. Thank you so much. Give me a phone call if you have any questions, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.